Senior Director of Regulatory Affairs at Tempus. Dr. Zimmerman, are you here? Dr. Zimmerman, you have 5 minutes. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
Is this for advancing?
Yes.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and my thanks to the committee and for the FDA for the opportunity to discuss this important topic. My name is Noah Zimmerman. I am a biomedical data scientist by training and the Vice President of Translational Science at Tempus. At Tempus, our mission is to develop technology that allows every patient to benefit from the experiences of the patient that came before. To this end, we ingest and structure huge amounts of clinical data, integrate this data with data from our own clinical laboratories, and use it to create and deploy artificial intelligence-based tools that clinicians and researchers use to advance healthcare treatment and discovery. We see tremendous potential for the application of generative AI to the vast amount of data that exists within the US healthcare system. And I'm here today to talk about how we believe regulatory frameworks can accommodate innovation in generative AI and best serve clinicians and patients. In a recently published survey of physicians, 1 out of 5 reported that they're already using ChatGPT for clinical tasks, including documentation, differential diagnosis, and even therapy selection. This rapid uptake of a new technology, especially for an industry that still loves its fax machines, is a testament to the tremendous benefits that frontline clinicians see in leveraging AI for patient care. And the potential benefits are immense, including use cases currently under development, such as medical note-taking, consultations and virtual second opinions, and results interpretations for patients. I think the message here is that the cat is out of the bag. The train has left the station. The alternative is not a world where patients and providers lack access to generative AI. The reality is that they will turn to general purpose tools, often without the appropriate guardrails in place. That's why it's so important for this committee to convene today to catalyze a critical discussion about how to establish those guardrails, ensuring safety and effectiveness while fostering continued innovation. The FDA has deep experience in pre-market review of medical devices with different technologies and intended uses. What's clear is there's no one-size-fits-all approach to determine the evidence needed to support pre-market review. Like so many advances that have come before, generative AI is just a technology that medical devices will use to achieve specific purposes. Focusing too much on the technology likely misses the forest for the trees. It's also important to note that not all generative AI used in healthcare is likely to be a medical device. For example, at Tempus, we are exploring the use of large language models for the task of information extraction from a longitudinal patient record. We may ask the model to review the case and extract the stage of cancer at diagnosis or the results of a particular diagnostic test. Here, the task is discrete. Take information from a clinical document, and the results are specific, a yes or a no, or a stage at diagnosis. Used in this context, the output is easily verifiable and evaluation can be conducted just like any other machine learning algorithm. However, many other applications will likely be considered devices, and when it is, the FDA should apply the same approach to authorize almost 1,000 safe and effective AI-enabled medical devices to date. FDA's current framework considers both the technology and its intended use, and FDA should continue to apply sound regulatory and scientific judgment to evaluate these factors and consider specific benefits and risks when determining the appropriate information to support review. All of this is not to say that there is nothing unique about generative AI. One particular challenge facing the medical AI research community is testing and evaluation of healthcare applications of generative AI. Unlike predictive AI, which works with defined boundaries, generative AI produces original content, text, sound, or images, that can appear highly human-like. It doesn't have the degree of obviousness that it is computer-generated, which may lead to an increased risk of automation bias. And so we think that this introduces 2 risks that are particularly important with respect to generative AI. The risk that the output is inaccurate, and the risk that the output is mistaken for human judgment. Early evaluation efforts for GenAI have relied on well-defined tasks, such as answering multiple choice questions from a medical board exam. These tasks have the benefit of being clearly defined, with inputs and validated answers, making them easy to assess. However, they fall short in capturing the complexities of real-world use cases. In practice, healthcare applications of generative AI often operate in unbounded environments, where the inputs are diverse, unpredictable, and context-dependent. For example, a model used in clinical decision support might need to interpret incomplete or ambiguous patient data. Or a chatbot for mental health support may need to respond empathetically while avoiding harmful advice. These real-world scenarios present unique challenges. How do we evaluate performance when the correct output isn't always clear? How do we ensure reliability when the same input might generate different outputs depending on subtle contextual factors? These challenges underscore the need for more dynamic and real-world approaches to monitoring generative AI systems, especially as their behavior can evolve over time and vary depending on context. This is where robust post-market surveillance mechanisms like a modernized MAUDE database can play a pivotal role in ensuring transparency, safety, and continuous learning across the total product lifecycle. The medical device reporting database is a critical tool for post-market surveillance, allowing manufacturers and the public to report adverse events associated with medical devices. However, as we think about the unique challenges of generative AI, we believe there's an opportunity to modernize MAUDE to better meet the needs of this evolving landscape. Generative AI introduces risks that are more dynamic and context-dependent than traditional devices. For example, the nature of errors, such as hallucinations or inaccuracies in output, can vary depending on the input prompt, the user's interpretation, or the context in which the tool has been used. Modernizing MAUDE could serve several important functions, including increased transparency, crowdsourcing insights, and continuous learning. Further, a robust post-market database can be used as a resource for research and development, allowing manufacturers and academic institutions to analyze patterns and design safer, more effective iterations of their devices. In short, MAUDE has the potential to evolve into an active, data-driven platform that supports transparency, post-market surveillance, and ongoing innovation. By embracing this vision, we can ensure that the entire ecosystem, from regulators to developers to end users, remain vigilant and adaptable in the face of rapidly changing technology landscape. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Our next speaker will be Dr. Bernardo Bizzo, Associate Chief Science Officer, the American College of Radiology Data Science Institute.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's a pleasure to be speaking on behalf of the American College of Radiology about our Assess AI program. I'm a diagnostic radiologist by training, Associate Chief Science Officer at the college, and a Senior Director of the Mass General Brigham AI Business. Those are my disclosures. And just for a brief context, the ACR exchanges images and data with over 40,000 imaging entities across the country through its technology, the ACR Connect infrastructure, for accreditation, registries, research, education, and very importantly today, AI programs. And the recognized Center for Healthcare AI, or ARCH AI, was launched recently and is the first national AI quality assurance program for radiology facilities, with at the moment 18 recognized centers and almost 50 centers in the pipeline for engagement, including international sites. And as part of this ARCH AI umbrella, Assess AI is a registry that provides real-world monitoring of imaging-based AI tools deployed in the clinical workflow. And Assess AI allows for a comparison of local performance metrics of these models to national benchmarks and also to facilities with similar characteristics such as region, facility type, trauma level, if it's urban or rural. And it's currently being piloted with 15 sites with 4 AI vendors and platforms engaged for 2 FDA-cleared clinical use cases, intracranial hemorrhage, ICH, or pulmonary embolism, PE, on CT cases. And just at a high level, the current state, how it's being applied for AI monitoring. Each one of these sites or facilities are part of the program with existing ACR infrastructure can connect their PACS data, including images and associated information, as well as medical record information, and the AI manufacturer and platforms to ACR Connect and reach the ACR Assess environment, where currently for these 2 narrow AI use cases, we collect site information about the final radiology report for each case that ran through the model, the AI model information, the manufacturer, the version of the software used, and the output. In this case, those are triage devices, just the binary classification of positive or negative for ICH or PE, and information about the case, the hospital, the facility, the patient demographics, age, sex, ethnicity. The DICOM had header information with technical details about the case that the model ran on. And then at the ACR Data Science Institute, we are using large language models prompts to by subject matter experts to extract information from those radiology reports. In this case, as they are positive or negative for those two findings, if they are adequate or suboptimal in their quality as reported, and if the radiologist had higher or low certainty when reporting those findings. And that data helps to generate analytics and reporting, so we can compare the report information with the model outputs and create dashboards with subgroup analysis, for example, assessing how AI impacts based on demographics, technical parameters, and also generate data regarding, for example, national incidence of findings. And then all this data can be distributed to different stakeholders at different levels. For example, for the sites, local performance dashboards, benchmark reports for other sites that have similar characteristics I mentioned, and of course, a national AI registry that can serve for much more information generation about these tools across the country. And that's the current state, using narrow AI tools. But of course, the future state is using GenAI use cases, and draft reporting is the first one that we are thinking about going next. Instead of using the CNNs, of course, using visual language models to draft a radiology report. And then that information can be assessed using the same framework that is already established to assess draft report and final report differences. And we're doing that through the Healthcare AI Challenge, powered by the AI Arena. And you're going to hear more about that later today by Keith Dreyer. But in summary, it's a collaborative community for healthcare AI validation and monitoring that includes the American College of Radiology as stakeholders, as well as Emory Healthcare, Medicine of Brigham, University of Washington, and Wisconsin. So this data can be aggregated. Healthcare professionals can be exposed to these AI tools, and you can assess the local validation of these models, as well as monitoring their performance. With that, I'm going to be respectful of your time. Thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions later.
Thank you so much. Dr. Bizzo, will you stay there if you don't mind? That might make it easier. Sure. And for our Digital Health Advisory Committee, any questions for Dr. Bizzo? I'll start with one. First of all, excellent work, and thank you for sharing how you think about it. As we're thinking about generative AI, rather than machine learning per se, the way we've been using it in radiology, are there specific elements that you think about monitoring with regard to safety or efficacy that you would include in the kind of work that you're doing?
Yeah, sure. As you all know, this new technology acts in a probabilistic way. So if you run the same data through the same model 100 times, you may have different answers, hallucinations. So we need to really focus on the content of the model output and how that, as was discussed previously by other presenters, can impact patient safety and the healthcare providers not being biased if they are not experts in the area that they are focusing on. So basically the content in the use case of drug reporting, I think there's a lot that we need to focus on with regards to the risks of changing care management in a way that can affect patient safety, and is an ongoing effort to think about the specific variables that need to be accounted for, and that's the work we're doing at the college.
Are you able to share anything about those specific variables that you include to measure whether or not that is happening?
Sure.
Only if you're able to.
Yeah, this is, of course, ongoing work. I think the number of changes compared to a final report, when you look at that draft report and how clinically meaningful those changes are, because there are stylish changes, there are content changes. So we're really focusing on how these tools can help with efficiency gains of the healthcare professional while maintaining patient safety. So if you look at the number of changes that could impact patient safety and patient care, if those are 1, 3, 5, how much that would impact the management of that patient, how that impact the efficiency of the healthcare professional using that tool. So we're really starting to scratch the surface about the specific metrics, as was well discussed in prior speakers' talks. But I think the number and the clinically relevance of those changes are the initial points.
Thank you so much. Dr. Batsis.
Yep.
I think you more or less responded to my question that I'm about to ask. Are you also checking about specific metrics that should be used for specific use cases? And I think this is very much linked to Dr. Elkin's point before about having a card for each of those models with particular characteristics, but I want to really focus on the evaluation piece in that card.
Yeah, no, for sure, there's a lot to think about the specific metrics, and I think they're going to be use case, going to be model task specific to a certain degree. The way we are envisioning, and Keith is going to talk more about the healthcare AI challenge, how different events, how this generative AI technology is applied to different types of data, generates different types of challenges. So in a nutshell, I think we're going to need to expose those AI outputs to healthcare professionals at scale, do a lot of local validation, a lot of monitoring based on risk determination of how well that tool can impact the clinical care activity by those healthcare professionals.
Taxiarchis Bots, a follow-up question on that. Do you specify certain thresholds for your use cases, thresholds that those models should exceed?
Yeah, so we're thinking about thresholds specifically about how well those models are performing. So the initial thinking is having healthcare professionals rate the clinical skill level of, in this case, a draft report, how it was created by one or many of these generative AI tools. And then let's take the radiology example. Let's take chest X-ray. As a radiologist, I can look at a foundation model generated chest X-ray draft report and say, this is the level of a radiologist attending, or at the level of a fellow. Good, but I need to make changes that change the clinical significance of this report, not just stylistic changes. Or at the level of a resident, it's okay, acceptable, but there is a lot to be changed to make sure that it's safe and effective. Or at the level of a student, where it's, with all respect, poor quality at that specific task, not at the level of an attending radiologist, or it's unacceptable. So based on those rates of how well an expert professional judges the draft report of that use case, I can set thresholds where specific models that go below that threshold will not be exposed in subsequent steps of this challenge, of this event, until we get to a point where a clinically safe threshold is defined for actual clinical use. Of course, bear in mind the whole regulatory aspect that need to be taken into account before reaching that point.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for taking your seats. If there are conversations that need to happen, please feel free to step out of the room for just a moment and then come back in if you are not actively participating. Okay, first of all, I want to thank the panel for their thoughtful recommendations in the previous session. There was a lot to go through, and they really not only hit the highlights, but went into great depth. We'll now resume the meeting, and we will hear 4 more presentations, after which the panel may ask questions to each of the presenters. Our first presenter is Dr. Michael Schlosser, who is Senior Vice President of Care Transformation and Innovation at HCA Healthcare. Dr. Schlosser, you may approach the podium. Oh, you're already there. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to address the panel. We at HCA Healthcare are excited for the possibilities that AI can bring to our healthcare teams and our patients. The opportunity to make healthcare more efficient and effective and a better experience is really a generational one. And so we appreciate the FDA and the federal government's thoughtful approach to ensuring that common sense regulation is advanced that supports responsible use of AI while not stifling innovation. I also want to clarify that I will use some examples from HCA Healthcare in my presentation, and while these are not medical devices, I believe the framework we will use to evaluate them, or we are using to evaluate them, is broadly relevant. And just a little bit of context, which I think is important as I go into my presentation, HCA Healthcare is one of the largest provider systems in the United States. We have 188 hospitals across 20 states, around 2,500 other sites of care, and we have the privilege of providing about 43 million patient encounters a year. And why that context is relevant is when you start evaluating generative AI use cases in particular, and you start thinking about things like hallucination rates and error rates, and you start talking about 1% and 2%, the math starts to add up really quickly. I'll give one example in my talk about nurse handoff, the handoff between one shift to the next in a hospital. We do that about 400,000 times a week, about 22 million times a year, so those 1% error rates start to look very different at that kind of scale. So three real topics, two that I'll speak to in a little bit of depth, and then one that I'll just make some quick comments on. The first is really around governance, which I think speaks directly to the topic in hand of risk mitigation, and I'll speak to the governance structure that we have stood up and are using and studying and learning from across all of HCA Healthcare. And then the second topic is around a specific risk mitigation strategy that we have used with some frequency, which is the human in the loop. And there's been a lot of conversation around that today, and so I think a little bit of a deeper dive into that is really useful and warranted. And then lastly, I want to make just a quick comment on data and data use. All AI strategies are data strategies, and so I think that's an important part of the conversation. So this is HCA's responsible AI framework. We developed this and put it into place about a year ago. We have a policy which is available on our public website that describes this in some detail. That policy went into effect earlier this year and really requires all of our 300,000 colleagues, including our practicing physicians and nurses and others, to engage in the responsible AI program if they're going to use AI use cases within the bounds of our healthcare system. And so whether they're using it on their personal devices, like we heard earlier today, people just pulling up ChatGPT on their phone to ask questions, or whether it's an AI system that we have deployed or are planning to deploy, the policy really directs that the first step is to engage with the responsible AI program and go through this risk mitigation strategy before the AI is really used at scale. The backbone of the strategy really is a risk-based approach. So as we've talked about a lot today, the types of AI vary dramatically from simple algorithms to these very large, complex, transformer-based generative AI models. And so a nuanced approach that really looks at risk and benefit and then understands whether we want to take on that risk and the benefit outweighs it, and then what are the mitigating strategies that we can use to decrease the risk is really the approach that we saw as the most successful one. I'm not going to go through everything that's in that wheel. That wheel describes our program, but I want to highlight a few of the key areas. You can see the 7 domains. I will talk about those on the next slide in a little more detail: safe and secure, private, transparent, and again, I'll go into those just in a little bit more detail. Those are the domains or areas of risk, and it's our framework. There are many other similar frameworks out there that we use to identify what are the unique risks that any specific AI application, if deployed, could create. Underneath those, the individual wedges are sort of subdomains, so more detailed questions in each of those domains that help us really get to the specific nuanced risks that may be created based on the AI solution we're considering deploying. Around the outside of the model are various mitigating strategies or levers that we have to pull in order to try to mitigate that risk. And so we talked earlier, the panel talked earlier about reskilling and education and how important that would be. And so you can see that's a key part of our strategy. Machine learning operations, which really are the systems for what we would call here post-market surveillance, but how do we continue to observe and manage models that are deployed at scale and ensure that they continue to perform at the level we want them to is another critical lever when we think about deploying these kinds of models. And then the other areas are our ethics, our cultural norms. These are ways that we expect our team members and our colleagues to show up and engage in these processes and do things in an ethical way and in ways that are consistent with how HCA healthcare practices in general. My last comment on this slide is that the team that represents this program, that administers this program, and it's a team of leaders and data scientists, really understand that their job is to enable the use of artificial intelligence. It's not to limit it. It would be very easy to manage the risk by just saying no. That's a pretty easy lever to pull, but that would again miss that generational opportunity we have to transform healthcare. And so they understand their job is to identify the risk, to mitigate it, and then only to say no if we feel like we're in a zone where we're not ready to take on a level of risk that a product potentially creates. So this is the 7 domains of risk that we study with each of our AI applications before we would pilot it or deploy it. And just to comment on that, many times the risk assessment really goes in multiple phases where we may only understand a piece of the picture of the risk it creates when we're just studying it on paper or studying other folks' use case or use of that product. And you actually have to deploy it in a pilot and study it to really fully understand how these risks may show up. And that gives you then a second layer of coming back to this process and then restudying and determining, do we have the right mitigating strategies for a scale deployment versus a pilot deployment. So there really are no surprises here. In fact, I think this is very similar to the FAVES construct that the ONC has used, though these don't organize themselves into a nice acronym, so the government could make use of this framework. But otherwise, I think very similar concepts. So safe and secure, we will establish careful and intentional guidelines to protect patient data against risk and ensure data is trusted and interpreted accurately. And I'm not going to read you the entire slide. Obviously, you have it in the record. But each of these questions or statements describes to the business user, the end user, or the person responsible for this AI application what it is that we expect of them as we think about how the application or the model is deployed and the mitigating strategies that we put into place. I would say that if you think about safety and security, privacy, really fair and impartial, these tend to be pretty technical. You're in the weeds there in terms of how does the model connect to our data systems and what are the ways in which those connections are governed, and how do we ensure that the data is being transmitted in a safe way and that the model can't be used to access the data that it has access to. Very, very technical conversations. When you get into transparent and explainable and robust and reliable, I think these are actually the more interesting domains of risk, and it's where I'll spend the rest of my time discussing here today. Because these are areas where often we don't have the complete answer. And we're still moving forward. I'm going to show you examples of how we're using AI, but I think the right answers are not completely determined yet in those areas. Just one more point on this risk model that we have. So underneath those 7 domains are actually 43 individual questions that make up a risk register. And so those questions each map to one of those domains. Again, you have this, so I won't read it to you, but this is an example on privacy. And so as we're considering deploying a model, as a business unit or a user is considering using a model, they're asked to go through these 43 questions and determine how does their model sort of map to this risk register. And is this a risk that model particularly has? Is it a high likelihood that this risk shows up when the model is deployed? Is it low likelihood? And then there's some data already in the register that suggests what the likely impact of this risk would be if it does show up. And then that all can be used, all 43 questions in conjunction, to come up with a score so that we understand, is this a low risk use case? Is it a medium risk? Is it a high risk or a critical risk use case? And then we have a governance structure that oversees how we respond to those 4 levels of risk. So we have a very senior level governance committee, which involves some of the senior leaders in the company, like our chief lawyer, chief of ethics and compliance, our chief clinical officer. The highest risk use cases have to be reviewed all the way by those level of folks before they would be used. If it's a medium or low risk use case, there's faster paths to at least piloting and testing those use cases. But the rigor of actually going through this process and asking these 43 individual questions, understanding those 7 domains of risk, mapping it to a level of risk, a bucket of high, medium, low, we believe is a framework with the governance structure to review that, that will help us deploy AI safely and effectively while not putting our patients or our care team members at risk in a way that we wouldn't want to. A big piece of this strategy also comes very much down to use case selection. So a lot of what we end up wrestling with is, do we want to take on this level of risk yet or not? And I'll tell you, HCA Healthcare's approach to this is that we're very much tiptoeing into the use of generative AI, and for a few reasons. One is, I think generative AI, we still have an enormous amount to learn about these models and how they perform and why they do the things that they do. And so putting a patient's treatment or diagnosis or other aspects of their care sort of directly at the end result of a generative AI model, I think is something at least our organization is not ready for. I think there's risk in taking on that too soon also, and that if we take on those kinds of risks and we make mistakes and patients get hurt, we could end up setting ourselves back years before we ever get to the point of being comfortable doing it again. So this incremental acceptance of risk over time, I think, is a way that we can build trust with models. We can get people to use them in a way that's low risk, but it builds comfort. It helps them understand how to use them, what they're good at, what they're not good at, which will make them better prepared to take the next step and then the next step. So this is just an example of what the risk register output of a generative AI model could look like. I'm not going to go through this all in detail here. I'm going to focus just on one bar or maybe two, which is the hallucination. So of course, generative AI models, and in this case, we were thinking about a use case where the model is producing an output like a medical note or a note summary. There's the risk of hallucination, which when you have the human in the loop, we would rate that as a moderate risk because the human is there to correct the errors. And then there is that risk of over-reliance on AI systems, which we have not really demonstrated yet, but certainly is something that we would be concerned about with these types of systems. So I want to focus just in my last few minutes here on this concept of human in the loop, which I think is an important aspect of generative AI models. In fact, I'm going to make the argument that I think it's a required aspect of generative AI models at this point in time. And we often talk about human in the loop as if it's just sort of one thing, which is the model produces an output, and then we ask the human to review it, they make their edits, and then they, accept the output, and then it goes into the medical record or whatever the next step of that model is. I think to do this really well is actually far more nuanced than that, because at scale, again, if I go back to the 22 million handoffs, if the end users are not really engaging in this human-in-the-loop process in a robust way, you could end up with a huge number of errors making it through those humans and into the medical record. And then it's very hard to calculate what the downstream impact of that could be over time, especially as it accumulates over time. So here are 6 concepts that I think are important when designing systems that include human-in-the-loop as its safety measure. I think promoting transparency in whatever way we can. We've had a good discussion about where you can be and can't be transparent in showing how a model made its decisions when you talk about generative AI, but there are lots of good transparency levers you can put into place, like asking the model to provide citations that show where it found the data that it displays. Displaying levels of uncertainty where it doesn't have a citation or can't show you exactly where that information comes from. Make sure that it's in the interface, that the user can see that level of uncertainty. Encourage active participation, so designing the UI UX in a way that it draws the end user in to that activity. This is where your UI UX designers are really worth their weight in gold. Provide training. We have a requirement in our Responsible AI program that anyone who uses AI has to go through at least a minimum level of training. We have a series of micro-learnings they're exposed to, which teaches them at least what generative AI is and what responsible use of AI looks like, so they have some baseline understanding of what these models are and what they can do. Design for trust and collaboration. And then last, implement feedback mechanisms. And I'm going to double-click on feedback mechanisms here for just a second. And I know I'm running short on time. I'm going to use this handoff example. So we, partnering with Google, designed a nurse handoff tool to assist in that process. It's a very important time in care delivery, as all the clinicians know. We used a standard framework, the IPASS framework. This is something that's been used for a long time. And we ventured to teach an AI model how to do this process, how to use an IPASS framework to read the medical record and come up with a consolidated summary, a timeline of the progression of care, and a prioritized list of tasks and key considerations for the oncoming shift. We built into the user interface of that handoff tool the ability for the end users to provide direct feedback on 5 what we thought were the most critical variables in their assessment of the quality of that model. So factuality, which speaks to hallucinations, coverage, organization, conciseness, and helpfulness. And they would evaluate all 5 of these on this red, yellow, green scale. And then there would also be a composite score where if they rated all 5 as green, then that would be a green note. It's important to note that these 5 features are actually sometimes in conflict with each other. And so you can have really good coverage and you can have good organization if you allow the model a lot of creativity, but that usually leads to hallucinations. If you make the model highly factual, it will often omit a lot of things, and its organization sometimes can be poor. And so balancing these things against each other is critically important to the usability of the model and the safety and helpfulness. So in this last slide, I'm just showing you one of the variables. This is factuality. We have this data for all 5 of them, but in the interest of brevity, I'm just showing you one example. What I think is interesting about this is if you look at model version 0, which was still, at the time we did this work, which is this past summer, we used some of the best foundation models that were available. We tried multiple different ones, including Google Gemini and OpenAI 4.0. And you can see that the model actually performed pretty poorly. And this was despite the fact that at the time, the literature would suggest these models were really good at summarization tools. But when you asked it to do something just slightly different than summarize, and you applied a really critical eye to it, the nurse, and said, no, I don't want just a summary. I want the critical elements, the most contextually relevant elements from the data to be presented, the model immediately did poor. And then we had to go through a series of steps, and we didn't change the foundation model actually through this entire progression. We changed the system that sits around that foundation model. And I'll just editorialize, that system includes the person that's using the model. It's part of that system. And we created feedback loops where they would score on that red, yellow, green. That information was passed back to the system, sometimes directly to developers, to the prompt engineers, sometimes in the form of recording the output as green, the highest quality output, and using that as examples that we fed the model. And using all of those techniques in an iterative way, we got to the right-hand side of the slide where we were over 90% factual, and the nurses told us at that point the model was good enough. It was also over 90% helpful to be able to use in at least a production pilot. This was a very controlled environment, and so we've now moved this into the next step. So a couple of final thoughts, and then I do want to mention my comment on data. So first is, I think when you evaluate these kinds of systems, it's very hard to detangle the model itself. In this case, the model itself is really just a foundation model. It's Gemini 1.5 Pro, from the system that you put around the model, which includes the user interface, the feedback mechanisms, and in the end, the people that are using the model. And so my opinion is if we're going to evaluate the performance of a generative AI system, you have to look at the performance of the system, not just the technical pieces of the model. I also believe that in order for AI to be successful, it actually has to be used. And so there's a certain threshold that we may want to see before we would deploy something broadly. As you can see, we did that ourselves. But I think that we're going to have to come to an acceptance that the answers to these questions are never going to be 100%. And so we're going to have to study, how do you deploy a model that's 98% successful? How do you ensure that it's designed such that humans are monitoring that 2% in a successful way? And then how are we returning that data that the humans are providing us back to the system and forming a continuous loop so that the model is constantly correcting errors and getting better? And that should protect against some forms of drift and other changes in the environment that the model may encounter. But just understanding the pre-market performance and assuming that that will somehow provide safety in the real world, I think is going to be incredibly challenging for generative AI. My last comment on data is that these foundation models are incredibly powerful, but it's the context-relevant data that makes them useful in workflow. And so these are always, in my opinion, going to be a combination of technology companies who have the ability to generate these foundation models and folks like ourselves who have rich context-sensitive data. And it's the bringing those two together that's really going to create successful outcomes. And so while I know FDA doesn't necessarily regulate or doesn't regulate patient data, I think making sure that we don't create dogmatic rules when it comes to how data is used that make it impossible for us to do that ongoing context-sensitive training, I think is also going to be important for success. So I'll end there. Apologize for running over time. And thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Schlosser. Next on the agenda is Dr. Keith Dreyer, Chief Data Science Officer and Chief Imaging Information Officer at Mass General Brigham. Dr. Dreyer.
Thank you. Thank you all for the opportunity to present. I'm a diagnostic radiologist, but have spent the last 10 years of my career dedicated almost 100% to the creation and deployment of AI in the pre-gen state and in the current GenAI state. I'm going to talk about narrow AI versus generative AI with respect to risk determination, controls, and safe innovation. I think it's important for this committee to be able to get a good purview of what the FDA has done successfully and some of the challenges that have been in place through the narrow AI era, if you will, in thinking forward as to some of these pluses and minuses might progress into this generative AI state. I want to look at technology, regulations, usage, and monitoring as kind of this life cycle. When technology, the CNNs came out in the early 20-teens, it was seen as a transformational technology that computers for the first time could do things that they couldn't do before at a percentage that was acceptable. And so that entered the foray of the concept of putting this into healthcare. I would say that this challenged the regulatory system in this country and several others around the notion of should we create software as a medical device and treat these as devices. They're obviously not food or not drugs, so if you have to have something that already exists, device probably makes sense. But I still think that this committee should even question today if that rubric of a device is the right way to take a look at GenAI, kind of like what was mentioned with Bakul Patel's recent article talking about this is more human-like. And so I think some of the challenges that we're going to see historically looking back is that we maybe made this decision too prematurely. The adoption of AI in this narrow AI state was also somewhat limited, and I'll talk about that for a variety of different reasons. And as you probably all know, monitoring is almost exactly zero throughout the United States in this by device manufacturers, as well as those that have deployed the technology. So I just want to talk about what happened through this stage of good technology, ran into some regulatory hurdles. First, the decision is it AI and is it used in healthcare? If the answer is yes, it falls into HHS. If it's a medical device, that answer is yes by 21st Century Cures or whatever mechanism you want to use to be able to determine that. Then it falls into FDA, this group here, and makes the decision. Falls into SAMD or software in a medical device, and then gets weighted for risk. The reality is software as a medical device is essentially all one risk, number two, so there is no risk stratification as Dr. Schlosser described what they're doing. And then there's different ways to get them approved. Probably most of you are familiar with this, but almost all have come through the 510K pathway. Being that these devices are predominantly imaging-based, where 75% are radiology, but upwards of high 80% are imaging of any kind, optho, cardiac, et cetera, and they fall into these known categories. And these categories also kind of determine risk, but now at the level of specificity of risk category 1, 2, 3. That has resulted in 900 AI medical devices for imaging of any type, 1,000 in total, another 100 that are software as a medical device for non-imaging. And I want to focus on these. This is really because that's what I do, and also this is the predominant area that has been used for the last 10 years and approved and deployed, because I think it's a good lesson to look at it retrospectively to see some of the things that could happen going forward. So basically there are two different categories, despite the fact that there are multiple risks, and it's really determined by these 6 categories are defined, but yet when it comes time to be able to impose a control to limit that risk, there's really only 2 choices. There's the concept of standalone performance testing or comparative effectiveness or a reader study. And that has created some challenges in the market today. So I put my glasses on. Challenges in the market today. in that the cleared devices of those 900 kind of look like this. About 13% are those high-risk but high-value solutions, and the bulk of the products that are available today are these CAD-T, CAD-AO, and MIMS-type solutions that had a lower bar to get through, so it was much cheaper as opposed to millions of dollars to go through a CRO approval process. It was in the hundreds of thousands and took months instead of years. So the result is there's a predominance of triage software and non-diagnostic solutions, and there's a very small number of diagnostic solutions available today. The result in that is, and through the American College of Radiology's survey of radiologists asking about adoption rates of AI over the last 5 years, it's about 2% today. And there's reasons for this. The FDA requires the triage not to show imaging results. So because triage is seen as a lower solution and standalone performance test is okay, that I believe the belief is, or it could be discussed, that if you do show images, now you're making a prediction, and as opposed to just triaging the patient. But that also has an unintended consequence of making it much more complex for that human to interpret that. So if I know there's a problem in the image, but I can't see where and I haven't been told where, I'm naturally going to take longer and be more concerned that I'm going to miss it, but I won't know what it is that I'm missing. And since all AI products require human oversight, with the exception of one, so that 900 require that, the triage AI makes the workforce burnout worse for radiologists. That's a very important point here, is that if I see that if I don't see what it is that the AI is saying, but the AI is saying there's something there, it's going to slow down those that are doing the interpretation. And therefore, many experts won't use this type of AI, and that represents 87%. CMS has created fewer than 5 CPT codes for payment of AI, and there's no commercial coverage for FDA-cleared AI products today. So there's no incentive to deploy. That means that it's off the back of practice performance that needs to be purchased, and these same products in other countries are considered diagnostic solutions providing improved patient care, but the AI coverage of diagnostic tasks in the United States is about 1%. And how would I come to that number? If you look at what a radiologist does, a fully capable general radiologist, of which there are few because everyone's subspecialized, there's about 3,500 findings that you would have to find to be able to read all modalities, all organ systems. If you look at the landscape of AI in the United States today, approved for CAD-E or CAD-X, it's this limited number that are there inside of those boxes, as you can see, predominantly in mammography, chest X-ray, et cetera. But there's about 42 of those 3,500 that are necessary, which is about less than about 1%. Also of note, though, if you look at the chest X-ray, as an example, 7 findings that are CAD-E or CAD-X for diagnosis. The same AI products in the UK and Asia provide full diagnostic coverage. Those CAD-T solutions here are full diagnostic solutions elsewhere in other sovereign nations. So at the end of that, because all AI requires human oversight, but not by an expert, arguably, if a non-qualified individual is using that AI to make an interpretation, it's arguably coming out sometimes with a worse diagnosis than if a human was able to do it completely independently, separate from the other lesser qualified individual that would be using AI to make the diagnosis. And we've had these problems in the organization, at Mass General Brigham in our organization. Limitations of SAMD risk classifications, in my mind, are preventing AI from providing patient benefit at this point. So if that's the state today, what happens as this technological innovation transforms into generative AI technology? Clearly, again, an absolutely incredible technology that has appeared on the scene just in the last few years. There is no regulatory pathway to have these medical devices approved. Dr. Schlosser discussed different ways for non-medical device AI to be used, but there is a tremendous challenge right now to try and use GenAI inside of a regulatory or medical device, even if it's created inside of an organization. So, yeah, usage is somewhat high, and monitoring is still bleak. And what do I mean by that? Well, there's pathways for people to be able to go straight to the solution like GenAI, drop an image in or do various things. That is happening today. And so it's not this life cycle. It's kind of like a direct line, like a lifeline approach to this is what's happening today. So let's talk about this regulatory challenge now in light of narrow AI and also generative AI. If you looked at the differences between the two, at least from my standpoint of how I see the challenges of regulation, which have clearly been discussed here, traditional neural networks are deterministic, they retrieve, they don't generate, and they have narrow capabilities. Whereas these are probabilistic, they're generative or can be generative, they can also retrieve, and they have emergent behavior, unforeseen activities that they can perform. So the question that I think is reasonable to ask is this notion of risk and that process that has been capable of controlling these deterministic retrieval narrow capable devices with standalone performance tests and comparative effectiveness tests, could that same kind of thing be applied to probabilistic generative behavior? I think the answer is yes. I think that you could just extend the risk curve and be able to use the same controls that were considered before with some caveats. If you look at this as all medical devices independent of the technology, but just looking at them as their intended use, their users, and their risk, then I think you get a kind of good analogy. But the thing I would say, and I'll talk about this more, is I would not use comparative effectiveness. Running a CRO and watching the use of reader studies compared to standalone performance tests, I don't see the value. I don't understand the value in comparative effectiveness testing. I don't see that it does anything stronger than a standalone performance test as compared to continuous monitoring and things you can do far beyond pre-market testing. So what I would do is look at standalone performance tests required for everything, as well as clinical validation. And I'll talk more about that in a second, what I mean by clinical validation. But then I would also look at the notion of ongoing monitoring. And those things should be based on and controlled by the amount of risk that the device imposes. So again, if I looked at this flow chart and looked at these CAD solutions that are out there today, standalone performance test handles these, and comparative effectiveness tests handle these, but I would argue again that standalone performance tests could probably do adequate at that. These are all pre-market testing with no monitoring. So if you add GenAI onto this list and it falls through as a SAMD or SIMD, then probably, I hope, not the knee-jerk reaction is to just do comparative effectiveness testing, because I think it's going to have the same challenge that it's had previously. And what I would do instead is start to impose standalone performance test plus validation plus the concept of monitoring. And now you have all these new devices that have to go through that rigor to various levels and degrees. But there's also, as Dr. Schlosser mentioned, there are non-device GenAI applications that are also need to be considered. I'll talk about those in a second, but those are not medical devices, so somewhere up in the level of HHS, maybe not FDA, maybe, that also needs to be managed and considered from a risk standpoint and for mechanisms of controls. So now we have devices that are not able to be used inside the United States, and we have devices that are able to be used inside the United States. And so it's a very confusing time for providers like us to decide where the line is drawn, what these things are, and then how exactly do you enforce these internally and how do you deploy them. Let me just use one example of voice-to-text transcription as well as diagnostic draft reporting. And it was interesting to see this used so many times as an example today, but let's just do that. So text, just like we do speech recognition as opposed to image recognition or image ability to create a text. So the process is, as a radiologist, and we do this, have been doing this for decades, I look at an image, I dictate the interpretation into AI of some sort. Previously, they were RNNs, now they're more and more LLMs or foundation models, and it does voice to text, and I get a report. That's a draft, I sign it off, and I'm ready to go. What I'm talking now about is the notion of taking an image, putting that into essentially the same AI, but now I get a draft report out, and now as the radiologist, I look at the draft, and I look at the image, and I make an interpretation. And now that's how I get the report. So transcription is considered to be not a device, but transvision or whatever you want to call it, I just made up the word, is a medical device by, if you look at the rules, 21st century cures. But it's the same AI solution. So the question I start to ask is, if transcription is okay to use, and transvision is not okay right now to use unless it's as considered a medical device and it has to get approved through a regulatory process to be determined. What about summarization? Like today, there are applications that say if you dictate half the report and you let AI complete that report for you into the impressions, that has at least been deployed and used extensively throughout the country and has not had any kind of FDA restriction on it. So I would say it's probably not a medical device, but unknown. What about quality checking? Others are talking about the ability to be able to say, you dictate whatever you want, and then I'll take a look at what you dictated, I'll take a look at the image, and I'll produce the difference between that to help to try and decide if there was anything that was missed. Again, unknown. So these are things I think that this group has to decide as to what are the bounds and confines of generative AI that falls under the rubric of a medical device, and does that even matter anymore today? And then finally, consumer usage where there's no claims and no regs seems like it's okay to use. So my biggest concern and what I see happening are, it's healthcare. Yes, we welcome AI, come on in, generative AI, please come in. And then, oh, it's a round peg, and all the AI that's already there is going through a round hole. And this says, wait, I can use the consumer entrance, no claims, no regs, no problems. That's what's happening, unfortunately. I know that no one wants this to happen, but this is what is happening until we find a better way to solve this problem. I want to use diagnostic draft reporting as a GenAI case study of what I think was happening. This is how we're setting this up at our organization. So if you think of this as the same model, right, it's doing both, then you can kind of think of it like this. So I basically, as the radiologist, am looking at the image and I'm doing dictation, just like I have been for decades. That's being handled by AI and it generates a draft report. What I'm talking about now, then I read that draft report, say, yes, it says what it's supposed to say, and I have a final report. What I'm talking now about is also adding the image into that AI so that it now can add additional information to that draft report so that I can do the same thing I've always done, but now that's a medical device. Now, if this was accurate, and this has been described in other presentations, it would add up to about 150% efficiency. We've seen no efficiency from the AI that's available today through the 900 products that are available to radiologists. This would clearly just improve efficiency. So the question is, how do we test this component for accuracy? By clinical validation and ongoing monitoring of this device. So this, Dr. Bizzo talked about the healthcare arena, but basically this is a collaborative community in the form of the FDA's collaborative community concept to be able to create a solution that allows people to be able to look at these large language models that are for medical devices or not for medical devices and see if they're applicable to the environment that we have, to the data that we have, to the subject matter experts that we have, and the involving foundation models that are being used. So what it does is it takes de-identified data and AI models and experts and makes them available here. In this example, it's a draft report. The important thing to note here is that when I talk about a model and the instructions are the prompt. And the prompt is actually baked in here, right? So it's not an open prompt. I can't ask whatever I want. This has been specifically trained and designed to be able to create a draft report. And so I take de-identified data, I run it through that generator, that draft report generator, and I get an AI result. I get a draft report. As the expert, I look at that, and most important, I look at the input data to that model as well. So now I see the the image that the model saw, and I see the output that the model generated, and I rate that. I rate that from a range of acceptable all the way to unacceptable. And through that process of multiple experts with multiple data being able to run this, I can now start to extract discordance, performance, generalizability, and bias, because we have ways to pull back to the data to say this subpopulation is biased, et cetera, et cetera. And so the arena gives you this geographically and demographically diverse embargoed data, unlimited clinical use cases. This one is the draft report generator. Geographically and institutionally diverse experts, and expert evaluation of AI agents with input data. So I can look at the input data and look at the agent's output data. And you wind up with these analytic evaluations of agents in real-world environments that help us to make a decision of whether we're going to deploy or not. Independent of FDA approval, we have to make that decision. And as well, create performance ratings in kind of a public forum. This is what it looks like. So in this particular example, I say create a draft report. I can select the areas that I want to look at, emergency, pulmonary, and I can now see There's clearly a fracture here. I can also see the output of the model that created that report that I'm now rating and evaluating. And I say, I feel that this is at the level of, at a Likert scale, resident 3. I got another example here. I read through the report. Another example, I rate it, etc. And now we have the ability to create these structured outputs, where these stand, and all of those statistics about these models that we need to decide to determine whether we want to use or able to use. The one thing that we've seen early in the deployment of this is the ability to reduce risk of these models. So one thing I would petition the committee to think about is, if there were pathways to be able to solve this problem while you're still trying to solve the entire problem, but it allows models to be able to come out that are safe or low risk, I think it'll help us all learn much more quickly how to go to the next ones that are higher and higher risk. I wouldn't try and solve everything at once, is what I guess I'm trying to say. So maybe if an open query isn't the best way to go, or there's no clarity on open query, at least a closed query using LLMs might be something that's acceptable. So in this case, the ability to create this information with the user and interpretation with an open query is pretty high risk. But what we've seen that the risk is much lower if you have fixed instruction prompts, if you show the input data, if the user is expert in that input data. So if it's a radiologist looking at MRIs, if it's a pathologist looking at pathology images, as well as the AI, and the interpretation, the usage is monitored, then that risk drops considerably. So fixed instructions, input data shown, user expert data, and usage is monitored is the big key. On this graph, it looks like this. You want to monitor that usage. So we see in this process of validation, of testing the model before it goes into deployment, it informs the manufacturer of potential defects, it determines the site accuracy and generalizability, it lowers the risk of failure on site, it promotes early and safe innovation, and it provides a mechanism for ongoing monitoring as well. You can use the same solution for that. I'll finally close with this thought. Is there a thoughtful way to regulate healthcare AI beyond a medical device definition? So if you think of this complex drawing that's got all these different pathways, is the way to maybe think of this to say, performance tests, site validation, and site monitoring are 3 controls that can be used for medical devices, or should they really be things that are accessible for devices, whether they're medical devices or not, just the fact that they do use AI? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Keith. Danielle Bitterman, who is the assistant professor at Harvard Medical School. And then we'll have one more presentation directly after that. Thanks, Dr. Bitterman.
Thank you so much to the panel for inviting me to speak today. I'm Danielle Bitterman, and I am at Mass General Brigham and Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, Harvard Medical School. And today I'm going to be speaking from my dual roles, both as a practicing clinician, I'm a radiation oncologist, as well as a researcher in natural language processing. My lab is focusing on developing natural language processing, including large language model methods, to support and enhance safe clinical care delivery. And we're very interested in developing methods to improve the automated evaluation and robust evaluation of these models. Here are my disclosures. So a lot has been talked today already about how large language models, foundation models are developed, but it is really difficult, as others have mentioned, to disentangle the quality of the foundation model from the safety and risks of a device. I really do think it's essential to understand and continue to monitor the underlying large language model that will be integrated into any device. So how do we get to the helpful and useful large language models that have really catalyzed this explosion of innovations in medical AI? So today's advanced large language models are generally trained by taking large amounts of text curated from the internet and having the model predict the next word in a sentence. So most of this text is not medical. It's standard text. And from that, we get a model that is able to transform and handle language. It can answer, non-medical questions pretty well. There also is a lot of information about biomedicine on the internet. And so the language models happen to be trained on that in the process of their general training. And as we've already heard, this has allowed us to develop, this has led to models that are large enough and train on enough data that can now pass a variety of different medical benchmarks, including the U.S. medical licensing exam. So it really is quite impressive. But there is still this outstanding question of how does performance on these benchmark evaluations in the general biomedical realm translate into safe and effective applications that truly help a clinician in practice and are safe for our patients. So while large language models have a lot of potential, they also bring unique risks that require proactive controls. And the goal here is to balance innovation and safety so we can realize the benefits for patients and providers as quickly as possible, but also as safely as possible. And again, the training processes through which we arrive at a large language model is the foundation for any medical device that uses that model, performance, behavior, and risks. So we already discussed language model pre-training. Most of these large language models also go through additional tuning processes known as instruction tuning and/or preference tuning. So instruction tuning is when a model is given an additional fine-tuning data set with instructions and the output of the desired instruction. They're tuned on that. That makes the model able to, of course, follow instructions. Preference tuning is a process by which a model is shown two different examples of a model output that have been human labeled for a preference. And while these make our models helpful, they also introduce new risks, such as leading to models that might be overly compliant, easy to jailbreak, as these models will often try and always give an answer, even if they may not, quote unquote, know the right answer, and that is risky for medical misinformation. In our group, we're really interested in understanding whether we can start to understand the risks and behaviors of a large language model from its pre-training data. We carried out a study on a smaller, publicly available large language model known as Pythia, for which the pre-training corpus is completely publicly available. And we were able to show that the pre-training corpora do kind of reflect realities of current medical knowledge. Here you can see these are the number of mentions of various diseases. I highlighted COVID-19 infection in the pre-training corpora that these models are trained on. And you can see, as expected, COVID-19 infections spike around 2019. So that's encouraging that for this model, it is, at least at the time of 2019, up to date with general medical knowledge. However, we also showed that biases that were present in the statistics of the pre-training data led to biased diagnostic decision-making of the ultimate model that used those data to train on. So that's actually very valuable to know. If you're able to, if you have access to a language model's pre-training data, you might be able to anticipate risks and its behavior in a more generalizable fashion than if you're relying on the inherently limited sets of benchmark data sets and red teaming prompting. However, this requires having transparency into the fine-tuning data sets, that pre-training data sets and fine-tuning data sets used to develop a model. It also requires transparency into how the model is trained. And I do want to really emphasize, from a clinician and researcher's perspective, it is a lot of risk for the clinicians and patients to take on to onboard models for which we do not have enough information into how they were trained. I know this is likely going to be a challenge, especially from the larger companies where this information is currently proprietary. But when we're talking about clinicians' liability and, most importantly, patients' healthcare, it really is incumbent on us. And we have I think, really unique opportunity right now to require more transparency so that we can ensure that we develop these safe models. All right, moving a little bit more into the translational side. There are risks at various levels of clinical application once we start to think about moving these models into clinic. These risks range from risks to systems privacy and security, risks arising from the device, and also risks to the device, things like cybersecurity concerns. Risks to patient safety and clinical effectiveness related to device performance, safety, and impact and outcomes. new risks related to workflow integration for which we need better understanding of human factors, better ways to collect user feedback in real or near real time, and better methods for scalable monitoring. And finally, a lot of ethical and legal concerns regarding the transparency, equity, accountability, and responsibility when one works with these models. And again, the behaviors and knowledge learned during model training and tuning modulate, and I would argue really form the backbone for for all of these risks. In terms of systems levels risk controls, some of these are unique to generative AI, and some are more broadly applicable to software integrated into a healthcare system. But large language models might interface with many different points of patient data, clinician data within the electronic health record system, as well as on the internet and patients interacting with these models via their personal devices. So data governance and clear definitions for data governance for the data input into the model and output from the model, as well as appropriate data masking, is important for understanding risk to privacy. Security protocols such as encryption, audit trails, and cybersecurity protections will be important from a systems level. And as we've heard a lot during today's talks, deployment controls for on-label use is really important. While pre-training and tuning form the backbone for a model's behavior, the prompting methods are also are of course the kind of final step to determining what that model will output. So role-based access controls might be one approach, if clearly defined, to help ensure on-label use. Beyond simply role-based access controls, being clear about how a device is going to standardize, clean, and ensure that the data input into the model, because those become the healthcare data, which become the prompts, are consistent, it will be important. Including issues about ensuring and ways to monitor for the type of data modalities, languages, and tasks that the model is being used for. Now, underlying all of this is ensuring the adequate clinical evaluation of these models. Again, current benchmark data sets that are used to assess large language models, a general biomedical knowledge, have clear gold standards and have reliable and automated evaluation methods, which is good. However, they do not reflect most of the really useful real-world applications that we care about, and where there's a lot of excitement for advancing healthcare. So I give one example of a real-world application, which is using large language models to help assist clinicians in responding to patient portal messages. This is a big source of clinician burnout, and many institutions are piloting this application. So this is just one example of a question a patient might ask in their patient portal. I've been experiencing hot flashes and night sweats for the past week. How likely is it a side effect from my prostate cancer treatment? What should I do? Now, if I asked 3 different physicians or oncologists to respond to this message, you would get 3 very different answers. If I showed those 3 oncologists a draft response to that message, you would likely get 3 very different assessments of the quality of the response. And this really makes it hard to assess language model performance. Currently, there are no or very few gold standards or reference sets to automate the evaluation of such generative type outputs, and no way to reliably automate these evaluations. Human evaluation still really is the backbone, but as I just mentioned, it has its own complications and requires clear definitions and transparency into how those evaluators were instructed to evaluate the quality of a model's output. Okay, so because of the limitations of existing evaluation benchmarks and the practical challenges of evaluating a small set of a small set of inputs for your given task, I really do think that a multi-level holistic evaluation is needed to start to understand a language model's risk profile. So one initial approach is to may be understanding the general safety of that model. In the general domain, there are benchmarks to evaluate how likely a model is to be truthful, how likely is it to produce toxic language. Evaluating these general harmful behaviors might start to give us a baseline understanding of the kind of more explicit riskiness of a model that's being integrated into a medical device. But it's not adequate on its own, of course. Our lab was interested in understanding just how these benchmarks might be, the extent to which they might truly be reflecting a model's quote-unquote knowledge versus just kind of stochasticities, or whether the model just was pre-trained on data. So we did just about the simplest thing we could do. We took the USMLE exam, the benchmark most commonly used to evaluate large language models' clinical reasoning capacity, and we switched all mentions of a brand name to a generic name of the same drug, and vice versa. Now, when we asked, so this was an example, a mechanism of action of leuprolide is GnRH agonism, that's the correct answer. When we switch those two terms referring to the same drug, the models often responded differently. And that's despite the fact that those models in most cases were able to accurately match the brand and generic drug as being the same. So benchmarks themselves need to be audited. This might be because the models were trained and overfit at this point to the USMLE medical licensing exam. But it also speaks to the fact that language models, quote unquote, reasoning or knowledge, and I'm sorry, I'm anthropomorphizing a little bit, is very different to how humans learn and reason. Language models are probably much better than humans at memorizing huge amounts of data, but they have flaws in knowledge manipulation that humans may not have. And this complicates using benchmark data sets or kind of testing existing credentialing methods to monitor a language model's knowledge, because you might really just be testing memorization and not a true understanding of the concept. We, in conjunction with several other NLP researchers internationally, have developed the Tripod LLM reporting checklist to provide standards for what should be reported in biomedical research according to large language models. We lay out information for that should be reported regarding the data used to develop the model, or whether the researcher did not have access to information to that data, how the model was developed, how the evaluation was carried out, who carried out the evaluation, and what were the guidelines by which the evaluation was conducted, and finally, what were the kind of results and endpoints for that study. Now, speaking to the kind of open-ended and nature of large language model, that we ended up using a modular format that adapts to different use cases. But this is one approach that we've arrived at to try and develop a more consistent method to evaluate these models. Now, finally, as we've seen, many AI models work incredibly differently in silico than they do when integrated into a busy, complicated, messy clinic. When large language models started to be rolled out into EHRs for patient portal messaging, we were really interested in understanding how that may impact clinician reasoning and risks when used with a human in the loop. So we carried out a preclinical study where we asked oncologists to respond to patient messages asking about new symptoms related to cancer, things that we often respond to in a patient portal. First, we had the oncologist manually write responses as usual. Then we had GPT-4 draft a response and asked the oncologist to revise it until they thought it was appropriate and safe to send to a human. And what did we see? We saw that in most cases, the language model response was safe, and in about 60% of cases, oncologists thought that the draft could be sent to a patient without additional editing. However, there was a small but clinically significant risk of severe harm or death without editing. So that's concerning. However, if humans are effective at overseeing these models, we could reduce that risk, and potentially it might be a safer implementation method. That said, we did see evidence of automation bias and over-reliance that could expose patients to those rarer, more harmful risks of a model. So we saw that clinicians, the content of responses was significantly different when clinicians manually wrote the response compared to when they used the LLM draft. The LLM drafts tended to closely reflect the LLM draft, suggesting that physicians might be relying on the LLM's clinical reasoning more than just using it as an efficiency assist. So even these more administrative approaches might impact clinical reasoning in unexpected ways. So when we're thinking about workflow integration controls, it will be really important to understand and to see evidence of how medical devices that use large language models impact effectiveness and safety when used as a part of the human-machine team. Automation bias and over-reliance are common and are likely to increase, and we can't rely only on human oversight to control these methods, to control these risks. There are various different approaches to post-deployment and real-world performance monitoring, ranging from regular quality assurance, prompt versioning controls, ongoing audits, monitoring for off-target use, and evaluation for shifts in how a user interacts with a model. Are they spending more time editing a response? Are more words being added or deleted from a report that's generated by an LLM? Those may give us early hints of faulty performance, and devices that integrate these controls are likely to be safer. I'm running out of time, so I'll skip over this and to just touch on some of the ethics and legal risks, which is really important for clinicians and patients to feel they can trust a model. LLMs come with a host of equity concerns. They learn biases from the model they're trained on. Human and machines may introduce new biases together, and they perform less well on lower resource languages. Transparency will be essential for ensuring trust from both the patient and clinician standpoint. Patients and clinicians really do deserve to know when they are interacting with a large language model. That might not be always clear because some of their output is so human-like. And when their data is being used to further refine a model. And finally, clearly defining who is accountable and responsible for any risks and errors of a model is an important risk control. If a clinician doesn't know that they're going to be accountable for the output, they may not use it in as safe a way as necessary. We've defined some levels of human in the loop previously, drawing from the Department of Transportation's categorizing models from assistive all the way to fully autonomous, which might be a helpful guide for further defining this. So in conclusion, language models have potentials to advance health, but have risks at multiple levels of healthcare. Challenges persist in scoping, monitoring, and mitigating risks, and human and computer interaction modulates the benefits of risks and need to be investigated and risk mitigated. There are several emerging approaches that should be considered when refining and developing oversight methods, including automated risk and performance assessments, interpretability methods, and innovations in usability design. And the goal of this overall more measured approach will be to facilitate a durable and sustainable implementation of AI that advances human health in the long term in a way that patients and clinicians feel trust and comfortable with our changing healthcare system. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Bitterman. We are going to forego our next break. Everybody gets 30 seconds to stand up for a second and not get sciatica. Do not leave your seat, please. Just stand up and stretch. And while you're doing that, Gabriella Waters, please come on up, Artificial Intelligence Evaluation Research Associate at NIST, and you will have 15 minutes for your presentation. All right, sciatica now being prevented. Everybody come on and have a seat. Yeah. Okay, we now welcome Gabriella Waters, AI Evaluation Research Associate at NIST, and the Director of the Cognitive and Neurodiversity AI Lab. Dr. Waters, you may begin, and you may notice me using two arms when things turn red up at the podium. So my apologies if I start waving at you.
I will just wave back. Hi, my name is Gabriella Waters. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. I was furiously deleting notes as the presenters before me were going, so this will be quicker because we were kind of walking in the same lane on what we wanted to talk about. I don't have to tell you what generative AI is, but as a theoretical AI researcher and someone who develops these models, what I want to say about them in response to some of the comments that were given earlier is that LLMs are a kind of technology that you should be more amazed when they get it right versus when they get it wrong. The probabilistic, stochastic nature of them lends them to furiously confabulating. So the example given by Dr. Bitterman, where the generic drug had the reversal of the names, is very logical when you consider that it is rolling a die on what the next word should be. It is only used to seeing the words in one order. So when it's not in that order, it's rolling a die on what the next word should be. And so when you have a model that behaves in this way, it's very challenging to deploy it in a high-risk situation, like in a clinical setting. It's also sort of risky to do any of this testing post-deployment. That's too late. All of the testing needs to happen beforehand. So I want to put a good order of operations in place before we continue on through. So again, I'm a theoretical researcher, so I'm going to always champion innovation and how we can move the technology forward and what that's going to look like. So generative AI is really good at helping us to do personalized treatment planning, helping to enhance that medical imaging capabilities. We've seen a lot of this work in diabetic retinal neuropathy in terms of how models can actually perceive images and make diagnoses, and looking at decision support. We've got lots of examples of that. I'm not going to go through it. I told you I promised I wasn't going to go over the same ground, but there are definitely risks that we need to consider. Data quality and bias, harmful bias. As a developer, we like bias in AI. It's the harmful bias that we want to get rid of. Good example, if I am looking at a data set and I only want women in the data set, the men in the audience might feel that's really biased. But if I tell you it's for a women's clinic, then that model needs to be biased. So bias can enhance performance. It's when the bias leads to harmful outputs that we have to be on alert. So just making sure we understand how the model is biased and under what situations that bias emerges, and then looking at the risks associated with that. We want to look at model transparency and explainability, and I keep those two separate. People who hold IP do not like transparency. So we want to do a trade-off between transparency and explainability. Full transparency means I know the entire suite of your ensemble. I know every single algorithm. I know how its architecture looks. Real-world transparency means I know when a model is being used. Explainability means that any person in this room can tell you how the model arrived at its decision. That's important for building trust. It's important for deploying things in the real world. And we're also looking at performance variability in the real world. LLMs and generative AI are non-deterministic. So you heard from Dr. Dreyer about deterministic neural networks. We know that if we pull a piece of information from that network, it's going to look the same every single time. In generative AI, that's not the case. You can ask the exact same question on 40 different machines and get a slightly different answer every time. And if that tiny bit of variance leads to a misdiagnosis, even 2% of the time, that's dangerous. And so real-world performance has to be something that's evaluated and tested for. In NIST, we have the AI risk management framework. So Dr. Dry also mentioned validation. We also need reliability. It's got to be reliable. And it's challenging to do that if you haven't tested for it beforehand. It's difficult to go back once it's out in the wild and then try to redress some of the challenges that you're seeing within the model. Dr. Benjamin mentioned governance controls. We definitely need some form of compliance as these models are developed and deployed and implemented, and what that looks like. We need some sort of review board. As a researcher, I have to submit to the IRB. As an AI developer, I do what I want. That's not right in the terms of clinical applications of this technology. So these are things that we need to consider. We talked about training, validation, and controls, robust training protocols. What does that mean? It is literally a free-for-all. You can develop your model in any way that you like. Remember, there used to be a slogan, have it your way? That's literally what it is when we're developing models. We just do whatever it is and then present it. We need protocols for this. We need those rigorous validation procedures. We need to have TEV as a standard part of the AI implementation process, the design process. It has to be there. Testing, evaluation, validation, and verification. Feedback mechanisms. It can't just be, I have the thumbs up there for a reason, it can't just be helpful and harmful. Binaries do not provide context. Why is it helpful? Why is it harmful? What happens when it's good? Why? What makes it good? The model can't learn outside of the context, and it can't update with just a thumbs up or a thumbs down. We love Likert scales. We really do. What else can we use to leverage really training these models for more robust performance? We need user feedback integration. How do we get all of the developers who are developing models for people to actually like people? Because at the end of the day, people are interfacing with these agents. And the number one complaint I get when I bring this up is people are messy. Like, yes. That's why you need to test with actual people. This shouldn't be a radical idea. We need to get that continuous feedback integration going so that we can understand the surfaces for which a risk can emerge, what the impact is of that kind of risk, and then what's the mitigation strategy for it. If we are only observing these things after something has gone wrong, we are again too late. Post-market surveillance and performance benchmarking. This is where I usually take a step back from the microphone and take a deep inhale. Benchmarking does not tell us about risk. Benchmarking tells us about capabilities and performance, and those things are not concurrent with risk. That just tells me that the model is doing what you said it was going to do. And in the process of doing that, it's making misdiagnoses. It's making judgments that are inappropriate. It's culturally irrelevant. It's doing all these things. But its F1 score is great. Those things don't tell us enough about the context of the use of the model. And so we want to make sure that we're not just hung up on KPIs, that we're also looking at how robustly we can measure the risks and not just the performance. So I'm trying to go fast, I'm going fast. So trends. I'm going to fly through these slides because you don't really need all of the details, but you need to know that people are thinking about how they can integrate generative AI into everything. As an AI researcher, I get two questions. What is AI? Is it ChatGPT or is it the Terminator? Those are the two. So everyone thinks that generative AI is AI, and businesses are trying to capitalize on integrating these systems into whatever use case they have. And so you're going to see through these slides that a lot of businesses are looking at an adoption curve to really drive home how they can get the best ROI on GenAI. It's not great right now, but the promise of a robust return is there. And so we're seeing a lot of interest in these areas. So I'm just going as fast as I can, looking at how we can scale up. That's another thing. Theoretical researcher hat is on. What is on the horizon? Lots of potential use cases for what the patient will experience in terms of how GenAI will touch their healthcare continuum as they journey through the system. From pharmaceuticals to their providers, the papers, the med tech, the services, public health agencies, all of these areas are touched by GenAI. We're going to start seeing mobile devices as medical devices. We're already seeing apps that are already on board, most of these devices that can track things like your heart rate, like your respiration, all kinds of, you have things that will alert you if any change happens from your baseline. So we're already starting to see this. And we're seeing a lot of online doctor interactions, online medical professional interactions. And the risks are, again, we heard about over-reliance, but we're also thinking about that as a two-way street, because the more distance we place between the healthcare provider and the patient, the more the patient may distrust the healthcare provider's advice, the more they may have trouble adhering. So we have to look at how these systems can augment instead of supplant. So there are ways where you can have an LLM that is parsing and summarizing information that's being pulled in from the online portal, or if it's in a mental health situation and someone submitted a report overnight and all of these kinds of information, but you still need to do that as part of a team. So you get this information, it's digestible, and then you're able to follow up as a human. So we need the human in the loop, we need the human feedback, we need to very critically test and evaluate these systems. We need to understand their mechanics. If I rolled a dice in front of you, each time I said a word, you would not trust that what I was going to say to you was going to be coherent. But that is the nature of generative AI. It's a dice roll, every single word. And as long as we have these systems in this way, and as long as the nature of them is so opaque, it's really challenging. And I'm not saying black box, because I love black box models. I love them. They're really good at finding patterns that humans don't understand. Opaque models are not really good at helping us understand why something is going wrong. So it comes back to the explainability, it comes back to the testing so that we can understand. I have successfully finished early.